And we got Cam Wolfe live.
There we go.
Nice.
Yes, sir. Sorry for the delay, man. Just handling some family business. How y'all fellas doing?
All good. Appreciate you for taking the time to jump on. I know you're a busy man. Was in Denver last week, and you're going to be back in Denver this week. How was that cold last week? I think it's going to be colder this weekend, actually.
Yeah, not looking forward to it, Dre. Not at all. It was very cold. I tried to find as many warm pockets inside as I could. But yeah, it's supposed to be 0 degrees, wind chilled. We're getting some flurries. I'll definitely be wishing I was home every second of Sunday morning. But that's the job, and I'm excited to see some good ball.
That's for damn sure. So, Wingo, I'll toss it to you. What are we going to ask Cam going into this week?
Yeah, so obviously, you got to be in Denver last week. You're going to get to be in Denver again this week. What is something you're kind of looking at? Obviously having a huge hit, losing Bo Nix. Are they going to be able to get the job done with obviously the dominant all-cylinder phases firing for the New England Patriots?
Yeah, great question, Wingo. I can't wait to see that Denver defense. And I think that obviously Jarrett Stidham is not Bo Nix, but the reason the Broncos are here is because they had one of the best defenses in football. And back-to-back sack leading team in back-to-back seasons, Vance Joseph's going to have some creative looks for Drake May. And Drake's really struggled to protect the ball the last couple of games in the playoffs. The offensive line has allowed him to get sacked 5 times this week. Can the Broncos defense own that game? 10 years ago, I covered a Broncos team that won a Super Bowl behind an elite defense, questionable quarterback play, and still made it happen. And I do think there's a path for the Broncos to beat the Patriots, but it's behind that defense. So Pat Surtain, Nick Bonitto, Jonathan Cooper, all of those guys on defense, can they rise to the moment? That's what I can't wait to see.
Yeah, you brought up Surtain. I think Surtain's dealing with a little bit of a shoulder injury. Should he be pretty much 100% by game?
Yeah, he'll be good to go. He suffered that shoulder injury last week. He tried to go head-to-head with a running back that was bigger than him, and he spent a little bit of time sitting down. But from what I understood, it was just a stinger. He's good to go. As far as injuries, I think the big one to watch will be J.K. Dobbins. He's been out for about 2 or 3 months with an injury, and he's back at practice this week. They have him as questionable for the game, so I think that's one that's going to be a true game-time decision. The Broncos' route on offense is to lean on that run game, and so can they get it going if they can get a J.K. Dobbins to add with R.J. Harvey in that backfield? That'll help Jarrett Stidham quite a bit. So that's the big one on their side.
Yeah, so I was kind of looking at the game plan here. If I was the New England Patriots, I'm looking at almost stacking the box, right? Obviously, having a guy like R.J. Harvey, is J.K. Dobbins going to play, and making them throw the football down the field. What do you see, is he going to be able to make those big-time plays? And then just how is the weather going to be able to affect just the turnovers on offense that Drake May had last week at quarterback position?
Yeah, that's a great point. I'll start on the Broncos side, right? So you got Jarrett Stidham, who Sean Payton loves. He's wanted him for a while, but he hadn't thrown a pass in the regular season for 2 years. And I talked to Milton Williams, the Patriots defensive tackle, and he said very simply, we want to make him throw every single down. He was like, we know that they like him. We're going to see how much they like him. And they want to completely take away the run game. I think you'll see them load the box and challenge Jarrett Stidham. I think they're going to play a lot of man-to-man coverage on the back end and say, okay, you trust your quarterback, trust him against us down the field, against a Christian Gonzalez, against a Carlton Davis who's questionable, but it sounds like he's trending towards playing. I think the Patriots are going to try to challenge them in that way. And so Jarrett Stidham's going to have to be Nick Foles. He's going to have to step up. They're not going to be hide him through an AFC Championship victory. And on the other side, you mentioned it, right? Drake May, they've struggled with pressure. And you look on the other end with the edge rushers they have in Nick Bonitto and Jonathan Cooper. I'd expect the Patriots to try to find those dump off passes to Travion Henderson, to Hunter Henry, to try to keep the offense flowing on a short passing attack. This is one where you got to tell Drake May, you don't got to win this game and be a superhero, man. You don't have to look for the 50-yard touchdowns. Just don't turn the ball over. And I think that's what you'll see from the Pats on Sunday.
Absolutely, yeah. And then on the other side, right, you got probably what seems to be kind of the big game of the weekend, right? It's Seattle, and then you got the Rams, right? And Stafford, who looks like he may end up the MVP of this year, right? So what are your thoughts on that game? Seattle's coming off a very dominant win against the 49ers last week, right? So what are your thoughts in that game? Obviously, Seattle's crowd is going to play an element in that game, but would love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, Seattle's defense is incredible. I think you've got to give John Snyder, their general manager, a lot of credit for rebuilding that team the way that he did. And they traded a couple of years ago, Jets, and that's really turned around the culture of that team. So you look at the defenses left in the playoffs, and I think the Seahawks are the best one. And so that's their X factor of the Rams have had up and down play from their defense. They have talent in spots, but they're not at the cohesiveness of the Seahawks. And so the Rams' big advantage is, hey, we've got a Super Bowl champ in Matthew Stafford, probably the best quarterback on paper left in the playoffs. And the Seahawks' big advantage is the defense. And so that battle is certainly going to decide it. I like Seattle having that home field advantage. I like the way they're playing on defense. The Rams are going to have to put something really special together to beat that Seattle team the way that they're flowing. And I'd love to see how JSN is going to get active against these DBs. He's worked pretty much everyone he's gone against in the playoffs so far.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be similar, right? Kind of stack the box. Like if you're the Rams, force Sam Darnold to be the guy to beat you. Obviously, there's no Charbonnet, but Kenneth Walker has been great. Was great last week for them, so they're going to try to rely on him. But reality is, like, well, they're down one back. They're going to ride with Kenneth Walker to kind of be their guy. But are they going to be able to do enough maybe to stop the run game and then force Darnold to try to be the guy and win that game for them?
Yeah, let's call the elephant in the room what it is. Everybody's wondering, is Sam Darnold going to turn into a pumpkin at midnight? You know, like, I think everybody just, it's like, is he really going to be able to be a Super Bowl contending quarterback? And I think that every time Seattle's been forced with that question this year, Sam has responded well. And so, although I still have a little bit of doubt in my mind, you know, it's the fourth quarter in the drive, all I can see is the evidence. And I've seen him come back fourth quarter drives against this very team and win in the regular season. And so I do think that Sam will play well. What you mentioned with the run game is definitely key because Seattle's offense has kind of gone up and down this year based on its run game. And so not having the two-headed backs field certainly hurts them. But the Rams have really, really struggled to cover. And JSN is a different level impact player. So if Sam is accurate, if Sam is on his game, I think they shouldn't have much problem scoring against this Rams defense.
Yeah, I kind of wanted to pick your brain a little bit about this NFL coaching carousel as well. You know, when you look at it, at one point it was 25 to 30% of these NFL teams looking for, you know, new coaches. Obviously, sometimes you're looking at the organizations that weren't very successful. Are you looking at hiring a former, you know, head coach, or you're looking at, you know, one of these successful offense or defensive coordinators? What do you just think overall of just, you know, the hirings that have already happened, or just the open spots that are left to kind of be filled?
Yeah, first of all, the busiest coaching cycle I can remember. 10 different openings. You see Mike Tomlin, John Harbaugh, and Sean McDermott all leave in the same cycle. And I think what's been interesting watching trend-wise is teams looking around and being comfortable with a defensive-minded head coach to kind of be a CEO, leader of the team, and transform it. I think people are seeing what Mike McDonald's doing in Seattle. I think they're looking at what Mike Vrabel's doing in New England and say, let's get that dynamic leader. And so I think we were going through a trend for a while where everybody was trying to find the next Sean McVay, the next hot offensive mind. And I think there's still some of that happening, but you're seeing a willingness of teams, you know, even Miami hiring a defensive minded head coach to try to reset your culture, even if you have a big need on offense. And so I think it's a positive trend for the league because there's only a limited amount of these elite play callers on offense. What happens when adversity hits? And so that's what you're seeing so far. I think you'll see a few more hires of defensive minds who are still elite leaders in the head coaching cycle. And so Buffalo is moving pretty quickly. You'll see a hire, I'd imagine, here in the next week there, and then, you know, I'd imagine the Browns will be next after that. You know, the Raiders and the Cardinals may be the last ones on the docket because they're waiting on some of these coaches who are still in the playoffs.
Yeah, that makes sense, right? And I think the interesting one really is obviously the Buffalo job. We saw this morning that actually Mike McDaniels now is interviewing for that job after kind of accepting the Chargers job, OC job, but basically contingent on the fact that he doesn't get a head coaching job. I guess is Mike's really only head coaching option at this point the Bills job? Because I know he had interviewed for the Ravens job, and he had interviewed for obviously the Tennessee job, which is full already, and then the Cleveland job.
Yeah, so he took his name out of the Cleveland Hunt race. I think he would have had a chance to get that gig, but I actually think he desired the Chargers OC job more than the Browns head coach job, which I think says something about the Browns and probably says something about a smart coach knowing where he can grow at. So I think right now, Buffalo, you've got Josh Allen. Anybody would want that job. You get a chance to coach Josh Allen. Now, would they hire the guy that was coming second to them in the division throughout their whole tenure? I don't know if that's going to be the case, but one thing that's interesting to me about the Bills race is they're having Josh Allen sit in on all of these interviews. They're actually down in Florida at the Pagula's residency, his offseason residency, having interviews this weekend. That's where they're interviewing McDaniel and Anthony Weaver and Grant Udinski, the Jags offensive coordinator. They're doing all of those interviews this weekend in his residency there. And I think that it's interesting that the quarterback is involved because it just shows how valuable Josh is to the future. And so I think you're going to see an offensive-minded hire, whether that's Brian Daboll, who some people I talk to think is the favorite there, used to be with Josh Allen as an offensive coordinator early on in his tenure. They have a great relationship. He's been a former head coach. Or do they go with a Davis Webb, who's still in Denver, who also has a great relationship with Josh? They also brought in Phillip Rivers for an interview this weekend as well, who's close with Josh. And so you're getting my themes here. Yeah. People who are close with Josh, who can build this team and get them over the hump from being a good team to a great team. I think that's where you'll see this hire go.
Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that you brought up Josh, too. We were talking about it a little bit earlier on the show. Is Josh Allen finally going to be able to get over the hump, right? That's what we've been, stressing the factor. Obviously, having a vacancy there now. He has all the weapons. He has what it needs to be around him. They got a firing offense with guys who can make plays, explosive plays. Their defense has been able to play decently well. So how can they now get over that hump? I think, to have Josh Allen involved in these interviews obviously shows the trust factor that they have in him, right? They want to keep that organization surrounded around Josh. But my biggest question is, how long do you let that go on? One of the things that was brought up earlier is, if he's going to take that next step, it's not going to be in Buffalo. How long will we keep dragging this out if Josh Allen and whoever maybe they bring in or whoever's there cannot get the job done?
It's a great question, and I think that's why you're seeing Josh Allen in these interviews, right? Mm-hmm. You're kind of seeing, you saw it this year with Joe Burrow. When Joe Burrow makes a comment about the direction, everybody's like, what, is he going to ask out of Cincinnati? What's the issue there? And whether it's good or bad for the organization, when you have a franchise quarterback that almost becomes equal to your franchise, they have the power, and you want to do everything to make them happy, because now that they have the power, they can tell you, hey, I don't think this place is the best place for me. I've never got the signal Josh would go that route, but I do think the organization is saying, hey, Josh turns 30 in this spring. We've already had 8 years with Josh where we haven't won a Super Bowl. We may not get another 8. You've seen quarterbacks in the past who have retired early if they felt like, the situation wasn't there. Andrew Luck's a perfect example. How long is Josh willing to take on this superhero role where he's getting beat up and banged up and not necessarily getting that title? So I think the pressure and the onus is higher than ever. I think you'll see this with the head coach hire where, hey, you've got 2 or 3 years to win this or at least get to the Super Bowl, or we're going to have to go a different direction. So it's a high-paced, high-intensity job, but that's the pressure that comes with having one of these dudes, a Josh, a Lamar, a Patrick Mahomes. If you've got one of these elite guys, you've got to win. And I think the Bills are very disappointed that in a year without Patrick Mahomes, without Lamar Jackson, without Joe Burrow in the playoffs, that they couldn't even get to the AFC Championship.
Yeah, I think that's just nuts in my opinion. One other team that I wanted to highlight as well was Pittsburgh, right? Obviously, Mike Tomlin, successful over 19 seasons, him kind of, transitioning out. Who are they looking at? Who are they kind of wanting to hire? In my opinion, it's get rid of Aaron Rodgers, right? You got to start somewhere where you can build. You're not looking for a one-off. You have guys in your team that can be successful. You have guys that are on big-time contracts. Let's get a young quarterback that can come in here and develop, right? And I think this coaching decision for the Pittsburgh Steelers is going to determine, right, the next 5 to 10 years for their organization, just because if they're not able to have a guy that can come in and get it done and change the culture to get over the hump, these guys on contracts are not going to be there for very long. So this decision coming in Pittsburgh, in my opinion, is going to be the deciding factor on whether Pittsburgh Steelers is able to kind of make that hump in the playoffs, or they're kind of just going to be a below 500 team from the future?
Yeah, you hit it on the nose. They're at a fork in the road with the franchise because Mike Tomlin had been there for so long, and I think he had hidden some of their holes to an extent because of his consistency and culture. And so you have to restart a culture. You can't just assume that you start from the foundation of a 9-8 base that Mike Tomlin built. You may start from the bottom. And so I think the hire you mentioned is so interesting because from what I understand, there's three favorites or three front runners right now for that job. Chris Shula, who's the Rams defensive coordinator. You've got Brian Flores, former Dolphins head coach, who is now the Vikings defensive coordinator. And you got Mike McCarthy, who used to be the Packers head coach. So Mike McCarthy's interesting because he was longtime coach with Aaron Rodgers, and they're still having a friendship. That's the path you're talking about, Wingo, that you didn't necessarily want them to do, or maybe Rodgers comes back one more year with McCarthy, and then they try to find the later young quarterback to take over. If they go Chris Shula or Brian Flores, I'd imagine you find a situation where they start over. They start over at quarterback. They reset the culture. They do things differently. And so it'll be interesting to see the Steelers kind of attach themselves to the old guard and say, hey, we're going to try to keep this thing flowing with Mike or with Mike McCarthy, or we're going to just reset this complete thing going forward. And I think they're still deciding as a franchise which route they want to go. They got a lot of older dudes and TJ Watt and Cam Hayward who still want to win and maybe only have a 1 or 2 year window, but they also need to reset this roster and get younger so that this doesn't hit a complete wall sooner than later.
I mean, I think the dynamic between Flo and Aaron Rodgers would not be something that would work really well. But Cam, one last question, and then we'll let you get out of here. But I know you got to speak to Hafley, new Dolphins head coach. Talk to us a little bit about kind of how that went, what you heard from him that kind of stood out.
Yeah, I had never met him before, so it was a complete fresh page for me, and I was actually impressed with the amount of passion, the amount of intensity that I got from him. I got a chance to talk with him one-on-one, and I just kind of was taken aback by some of his answers because they didn't feel super prepped. A lot of times you come in with statements, you know what you're going to say, but I tried to catch him off guard, and I even told him about a player in the press conference who told me that, right when he finished up, he said, hey, look, that's him. That's the right guy. And so he feels that right when he comes off, and he goes on to tell me stories about how that the first week he's taking the job, he's going to call as many players as he can and get them into the building and try to build a relationship with them and try to connect with them so that they can build that culture now. And he talked a lot about accountability and how time with Micah Parsons, with Rondé Barber, with Richard Sherman and Darrelle Revis kind of taught him how to hold stars accountable by showing them their good tape and also their bad tape to push them. And I think that's something the Dolphins desperately need. That was the question with the previous regime. Great play calling. Can we get it over the top with these stars and these personalities? And it seems like, at least the first impression I got from Hafley, that's a strong skill of his. So they're 0-0 right now. We're selling the hope of the future. But I do think that, for fans who are wondering who the heck are these guys, I got a more positive impression of why they hired these guys inside the room. Ultimately, a lot is going to be on the new GM, right. John Eric Sullivan. Can he find that quarterback? It does sound like they're going to move on from Tua. Now, the route of that is, can we get a trade? Do we just bite the bullet and release him? Does he stay on the roster in a competitive fashion? I think that's all coming through in time, but this is a team that they just said, we're going to draft a quarterback every year. We're going to bring competition in. And so this is their mission to get this thing right. And I think you'll see this team be built a little bit more in the trenches, a little bit more physical than the speedy Dolphins we saw in the Mike McDaniel era.
Absolutely. And did they mention how they're going to go about the rebrand? Are they going to call them the Green Bay Dolphins or the Miami Packers?
There was no consensus on a nickname. Green Bay South, whatever you want to call it. Look, they're going to be hiring coordinators and position coaches here, and I think you're going to see at least 3 or 4 other Packers coaches join them here. So, it is definitely the Green Bay way. They have not hidden from that. That's a lot of draft and develop. And so if you're a Dolphins fan, you're probably going to expect less of these splashy trade for Tyreek, trade for Jalen Ramsey moves, and more quieter off seasons built on let's build this thing through the draft and re-sign our own. So quieter off seasons, but hopefully their hope is that translates to louder January.
Yeah.
So that's the path we're going to see if they can make it.
I like it. I like it. Well, Cam, appreciate your time. I know you got a lot going on. Have a safe trip over to Denver. Stay warm out there, and we'll have some good football this weekend.